hosting, you could tell, can't you?
I'm new to
Hello. Hello, good evening. Welcome to what I'm calling the Being Fine show now. I'm Jo Baldwin, Trott, the editor of a very new book that literally is hot off the press, Being Fine, the Other F Word. It's just been published by Proper Books, which is my company. I'm the editor of this book. I've written one of the chapters, and the book has been out a whole of a week. The reviews have been astounding, and this is our weekly chat about one of the with one of the authors from the book, and also about this important subject of sharing, not using this other F word, and being more honest with our feelings. And it's aimed at men. So, funnily enough, I have two men with me tonight. I'm very thrilled to have Mike Sheridan from London and Renee Dechuvnik. I will get Dechuvink. Nearly. I'll get it right one day.
The Koenig.
Awesome. Anyway, Renee from Portsmouth. Hi, Renee. Hi, Mike. Great to see you.
Good evening.
Hi. Got to do the wave, even though, you know, it's kind of a bit of a weird random wave thing we do. So great to see you. Thanks for coming on the show tonight. It's been an incredibly exciting week. So we've had one book launch on Sunday, which Renee came along to. And we also are having one tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. our time GMT. It will actually be the official Australia book launch, so 9 p.m. in Australia in Melbourne, where the show will be hosted, or the launch will be hosted. So I'm really thrilled. If you'd like to know more about that, I will post the event details onto this posting tonight. I will put them in the Being Fine Facebook group, or just go to Eventbrite and search Being Fine book, and it will come up with the event tomorrow at 10 a.m. GMT. So about the book, fantastic reviews. It's been incredible. I'm really thrilled to have Mike Sheridan, who is one of the authors in the book, with me tonight. Renee D. Sorry, Renee. I will get better. I promise. I keep practicing. Renee has a very big thing in common with Mike, and what we're going to do with these talks is actually widen the net a bit with these conversations about being fine. Renee and Mike have something very major in common, as well as being authors, and as well as many other things. And that is the fact that they have both actually, for quite a significant time, been the solo parents for their daughters. So not only solo parents, but they've also both had daughters to bring up. And we're going to focus on Mike to start with, because Mike's chapter is called His Menopause. Mike and I took a little while, a bit of bantering about coming up with Mike's chapter title, because obviously it's a very big topic that Mike's talks about. I don't want to spoil it. I want to ask him about that. But Mike lives in Ealing in West London. He has been a corporate man before, but now he just likes talking about cycling. So I'm going to try not to mention it, because we won't shut him up.
Very important, cycling, yeah.
The most important thing now is cycling, which I think is fantastic. Mike, really great to see you. And your chapter has blown me away. It blew me away from the start. What have people said about your chapter for the feedback? Have you had friends and relatives read it so far?
I have, but you know, it's been quite early days, so I haven't had any direct feedback. My immediate family know obviously about my story, because this was about over 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when everything sort of kicked off. But to answer your question, I mean, there are two major parts to my story. And the way is it okay just to sort of talk in general terms about it? Because obviously people can read about it in the book. Okay. But the first part is really about what the challenges I had that led to a severe problem of anxiety. And you know, it's difficult to generalize, and I don't want to do that, but everyone's experience of a major life event is unique. But the trigger to my anxiety was obviously the demise of my 20-year relationship, 70-year marriage. And what culminated in my first wife at the time just abandoning the home. Just one day deciding to leave, literally with only the clothes that she was standing up in. Now, I can accept and have done, my own responsibility for my part in the demise of our marriage, our relationship at the time. But it took me the main part of my story is it took me an awful long time to gain some perspective on what I'd witnessed and what actually transpired. And the perspective that I have is basically that this whole life cycle, the challenges that women have with their natural health, with their reproductive health, and with hormones is very real and very transforming and very combative to a relationship. And I believe it's compounded. The problem is perhaps can be compounded today by the introduction of chemically manufactured hormone, some of which is the urine extract of pregnant horses mixed with chemicals in a laboratory. And that's given to us as a way of coping with what is a natural biological event. So I mean, to get the detail of that, people would really have to read the book. But my perspective was something that really had to be self-taught and self-learned. And really what I struggled with was this idea that if women are just, obviously it was a taboo subject, and it probably to some extent still is. But if women are struggling to understand what's happening to them, what chance do men have? Literally, what chance do men have? And I was one of those people who, and I think it may have been said to me at the time, well, read this book about menopause, or read this book about what's happening or what might be happening here. And I'm afraid, I'll admit it, one of those guys that just simply didn't pick the book up and didn't read it. And I didn't educate myself. And there's not a lot talked about in the press or general culture or the media. There's more now, a lot more now, but cast your mind back sort of 10, 15 years or more, and there was literally nothing. Now, our own sort of personal history was that after my daughter was born, we couldn't have any more children. And so there was early onset menopause, and there was, at the age of sort of 30, just over 30, and we did 3 rounds of IVF. And I spoke to a very good friend of yours, and thank you for the referral. And she was saying to me that that in itself is a very intrusive procedure, and not just because of the injections that people are given, which again are hormonal related and really prevent some significant challenges in managing all of that. Obviously there's a major impact in your relationship. So it's not just about menopause. Obviously that is kind of the life event that triggered my general anxiety disorder, and really my chapter is more about the link between the two in my own particular story, and how the anxiety got to a point in having to deal with the aftermath that I had to seek help. And I was fortunate enough to seek help before it became a major, major problem for me. And I now understand what anxiety is a lot better, and how to manage it, and what the triggers are for me in my own situation. And I have to confess, I know it's a word that we use an awful lot now, anxiety, but I never really understood what it was until it hit me like an express train. And then I was referred to a mental health practitioner, and I had to fill in the NHS forms. And that's when they tell you, well, what you have here is a general anxiety condition that is very severe, because obviously they have to assess, well, how often have you thought about self-harm? How often have you thought about switching off your anxiety? And it's a curious thing, because we hear about it all the time in the media. You know, people say, oh, I suffer from anxiety, or I'm worried about this, I'm worried about that. But at its worst, it is living in a constant state of panic. It's living in a constant state of a panic attack. It's like you are falling from the sky and trying to flap your wings, and you just know that you're going to hit the ground. I mean, it's that severe. And on top of that, you know, I wasn't sleeping, so there was sleep deprivation as well. So you're on a downward spiral. So my book is about coming back from that, the methods that I found to manage my own condition, to take control of my situation, but also then as a man to understand and get perspective around what had happened and what we are faced with during, let's call it, the midlife transition. That sounds like a terrible Americanism, doesn't it? But it's something that I think we're, as a human society, as a modern society, learning a lot more about every day, about how to deal with it. And by that, I mean the midlife transition. It's no coincidence that the vast majority of divorces, the vast majority of separations, after a long period of happiness and togetherness and rearing children and careers and everything like that, fall apart at a time of around between the ages of, you know, mid-40s to mid-50s. And it's in America, it's as much as 50% of people, you know, who hit this brick wall in terms of their relationship at midlife. And as a young man, you naturally don't think about it, because nobody tells you about it, you know.
Well, it doesn't get spoken about with women, let alone men.
Right. Yeah.
And I think, you know, when we first met and you shared your story with me over a coffee, I was blown away by, firstly, the way you just, like you've just done now, is really openly share such obviously, you know, traumatic and very difficult circumstances. So thank you again for just being so, you know, bursting that bubble of not talking about this important issue, like so many of you are doing in this book. But there's almost, you know, I've said to you, I hope you write your book, full book one day, because the relevance of the fact that you are prizing open this can of worms, which is so relevant and impactful of so many people, so many, and I think I know so many friends that have gone through menopause that is like hell on earth for them.
Yeah.
But hearing your perspective on it was so powerful, and I think it's really wonderful that you're sharing this perspective, and also sadly the outcome of not getting the right help. And I mean, I kind of want to bring it back to Mike about your your journey, because that's what we're talking about here. So the anxiety. So when your marriage ended, well, obviously your wife left, literally. And so did you, because obviously a lot of the authors talk about, they just went into kind of manage mode, and we'll come on to ask Renee about this in a minute. So I guess, was it a case of you just kind of kept going, you've got your daughter to look after, kept going and kept going, and why don't, and I suppose this is to help people watching and listening, what were the triggers that you maybe could have picked up on to get help earlier before you hit that wall, do you think?
I've thought about this a lot, and so there are two aspects to that. So when you go to counselling, or when you go to relationship counselling, and when you have some grey hairs, and you're sat there as a couple, and things are being said that to the counsellor, that are really quite off the wall and sound really quite bizarre. You know, you're asked a lot of questions about, well, the status of your relationship, or why there are struggles or some of the history. Nobody says, and how are you both getting on with the menopause? Nobody says to me, and if you've done, anyone that's done this, you'll know that you have a one-to-one with the counsellor individually, and then you come together as a couple, etc. But no one says to the man during IVF, how do you feel about this infertility situation? And it's interesting, I may have sent you a message, but I'm jumping around here. But when I was told, going through the IVF process, I was told that as a man, in the reproductive sense, I was fine.
That word again.
You know, I wrote that down. I thought, well, I'll settle for fine. I don't have to be outstanding, do I? You know, but yes, no. In the counsellor's room, if you are of a certain age, and there's no getting away from it, because every couple, every woman is going to go through this transition, and coincidentally, I don't think it's. Sorry, I think that's why HRTs become a kind of once you reach a certain age or you're having problems, have this. You know what I mean? The GP will prescribe HRT. But for me, if I'd known more, I'm rambling now, but if I'd known more and somebody had said to me, well, taken the man aside and said, do you know what's happening here? It could be that this is a major part of what's happening here, i.e., it's a natural transition, it's a natural life event. And here's some reading material. I mean, I'm the most educated man, self-educated, self-taught man on menopause, and people think I'm mad because I've read all the books, you know? And but I had to do that after the event. Yeah. Nobody said to me, here's Dr. Glenville's book on how to cope with menopause and naturally. And I've read recently that, obviously it's a new phenomenon that we're now talking about this, but sadly, women used to be locked away in institutions.
I know, Mike. Tell me about it.
Women used to be locked away in institutions. And going back a century or more ago, they were tried for witchcraft. And if and it really was a case of him saying, or the lead counsellor, the authorities saying, this woman has now gone completely stark raving bonkers. What are we going to do about it? And they used to try them for witchcraft, So, but fast forward to now, in the relationship counselling room, to answer your question, nobody is saying to him when the SHIT hits the fan on the relationship front, let's stand back from this and let's actually look at what's happening here. All they're interested in talking about is the usual stuff about, breakdown and, or here's the roadmap on financial separation, or here's the roadmap on, well, they'll say we're only here to do two things. One is to help you stay together or help you separate. And there's nothing else in between.
And do you think there's a lot of, and I don't know how much, Renee, because obviously I know you're full state Renee, but that it seems that there's a big relevance here to the fact that we rarely actually really consider the medical situation. And obviously one of our authors has had an experience with miscarriages, which, he sort of left out of the book because obviously it's very personal. But again, went through a whole series of miscarriages and sadly wasn't able to get any help. It wasn't offered. And I just feel like there's a real neglect from a therapist counselling point of view, possibly generalising hugely, but just in the cases that we're talking about here. Because where it's not like recognised, registered, validated, and like you say, Mike, brought into the conversation to even consider the impacts of all these things. Renee, can we bring you in? So thank you for joining tonight, and thank you for listening and watching, whoever's listening and watching out there. Renee, obviously you're not part of the book. I think if we'd met 9 months ago, I probably would have badgered you to be in the book.
But probably in the next book.
Well, hopefully, yeah, that would be great. But obviously, I don't know how much you're prepared to share, but I know there's part of your story which is medically related. But you looked after your 3 daughters for 15 years by yourself, which is remarkable. I mean, I have twin girls, and I'm a mum, and I struggle like crazy sometimes. So I absolutely take my hat off to you, as I do you, Mike, for looking after your daughter. But what do you feel could have helped differently? And just if you're happy to share a bit about your story, then please do.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the invite, Joe and Mike. What happened, in fact, is that I moved to Germany due to the armed forces, and as a single person, met somebody back in Belgium. We married. She came along to Germany, and after a couple of years, the Belgian armed forces came back from Germany to Belgium. That was the end of the story of the occupation, the Belgian occupation in Germany. Due to the World War, they had the facility to stay there for X, Y, Z years. And then they had to come back. And we came back in 1991 to Belgium, where a whole lot of things changed for us, because we lived in a community in Belgian armed forces in Germany. Is a community, and everybody is relying on everybody. I mean, and then you come back to Belgium, and there's like a whole wild world opening up. And what happened is that, how should I say this? That my partner explored certain things, right, to keep it a bit decent, and she was exploring certain things and went the wrong way, whereas I asked her to go to rehab a couple of times, which she did. She took her responsibility, and I said, yeah, but after the 4th time I said, if this happens once more, I mean, I'm done with it, because this is not a basis for 3 kids. 3 kids, 2, 4, and 6 at that time. And what happened was, the other way. I mean, she started all over again. I said, this is it. That was the beginning of the separation, and then went through a divorce. And then the question was asked, like, hey, will you take care of your kids? And I said, yes, of course. And in the back of my head, it went like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do that? I mean, having a job, having a house that I bought, and pay the bills and look after 3 daughters. But then I assumed that what kicked in within me is my not education, how you call that, the army. What I learned in the army is survive. And that kicked in, the survival mode kicked in. And what I did was just, you keep on doing it. And you don't say, oh, it's not me, it's not for me, I'm not going to make it. And no, there's no space for that. You have to do it. And people sometimes now, so many years later, how did you do it? I say, I don't know. I just did it. It's survival mode that kicks in. But what Mike said is so true. Nobody cares about you. They care about the kids. They care about all as well. But when you have something inside of you, nobody's asking, hey, how are you doing? And that is something, I mean, that hit me a couple of times. And the only thing that I could change my state with was a bottle of beer or a bottle of wine, and then the next day a hangover, and saying, hey, come on, man, get back on the right track. And what was yesterday is yesterday. And to be frankly honest, I did that a couple of times. You grab a bottle and you think it's gonna be well and it's gonna be good, and you feel good for an hour or two, and you go to bed. But the next day you start realizing, hey, back to survival mode. Come on, do it. And that is still like that today. When I listen to stories, not only your story, Mike, or Joe, or whoever, but when I hear this in NHS and mental health, what is going on in not only in the UK but in Europe, it's devastating. It's devastating. I mean, I don't know, Mike, if you want to add something or.
Yeah, no, I mean, self-medication with alcohol. I mean, I mean, I've been there and was there, and it's a big part of our society in the UK as well. But I got to a point where I knew it was unhealthy for me. It was an unhealthy distraction, it was a short-term release. It was a short-term relief.
Exactly.
And, you know, we laughed about the bicycle earlier, but, you know, think about it. There's a healthy distraction. There's a healthy release. And I got to the point of knowing that, well, listen, if I was going to do a really long ride on a Saturday morning, I wasn't going to have any alcohol on a Friday night. And it's been fantastic. But it taught me that there are unhealthy distractions and healthy distractions.
Yes.
And the big one, obviously, is exercise and diet in terms of the healthy ones. But I'm far less judgmental of people who struggle with drugs and alcohol because of extreme emotional problems. And I think we're all on a spectrum. We're all on a graph somewhere. And you were talking there about strength and self-determination, and that's something else that kicked in for me. And everybody has to learn that lesson themselves. You know, sadly, we all have to find our own solutions, you know, and but listen, I only had one daughter, and I wasn't entirely a sole parent because I sorted out 50-50 shared care in the end, shortly after things went awry. I don't know how you would do it with 2 or 3. So all credit to you guys, you know.
But yeah,
but you never hear about the single working father, do you?
Well, you know,
you do now.
You do now. But,
yeah.
but,
but no, I mean, I'd just like to pull on a couple of points. I think, you know, coming back to what you're saying, Renee, is obviously Maria Adriana Contreras brings this up in her chapter. There's a point where we have to kind of come out of denial, isn't there, and actually recognize what's happening. So there's a mutual responsibility, I suppose, of actually recognizing that something's wrong here and to reach out for help. And then there's also the reciprocal kind of, we're here to help you. What's going on? I don't know. It's very difficult. And I think there's obviously every case is different, but it's a very recurring theme in all the chapters that with some people that there was not any consideration for that they might need help, and how are you doing and are you struggling? Johnny Jensen, for example, nobody ever asked him that. Like one doctor gave him one leaflet once, and that was it. So, you know, I think it's tragic that you went through that whole time, Renee, without anyone actually saying, how are you doing?
I wouldn't, at that time, I was not aware of it. Because I was in survival mode. I mean, I remember in 90, I was in the 80s. They dropped us in Corsica in the mountains in the internal snow. At the beach, it was 26, 27 degrees Celsius. And they dropped us in the mountains where it was an eternal snow. And they said, we see you guys in 14 days at the beach. And you better be there. And that was it. And he had a machete, and he had some salt tablets, and all these things to survive. And that was it. And years later, you find yourself in a situation, and the only thing you can think about is that, hey, how are we going to survive this? I had moments in my life, and I don't want to be the tragic guy here, but I had moments in my life, I had food for my kids, and I did not know what I was going to have. Because there was just no money enough. And I said, you know what? You're gonna get there. Don't worry. This is survival. But I never, ever thought about, like, hey, how do I feel? Where can I go with my feelings? I never thought about it because you're in such a survival mode. And then, but afterwards, when things go back to normal, you said, how did I do this?
So that intrigues me, because part of me, I totally understand, and I'm just trying to break it down. It's like, well, why didn't that kick in? Why didn't it kick in that, you are struggling type life? It's the survival mode. Where does that come from? What drives that? How does it keep going for so long? I know there's an obvious answer to that. I guess I'm asking you for the answer underneath the answer, if you see what I mean.
I think I can answer that question. As a kid, I was always bullied. And for those who are listening, I'm doing very well today. But I was always bullied. It was always, they will destroy my pencil bag. They will throw away my bag with my books in it. There was always something going on, and being bullied like you don't want to know. And I ran home crying, and I didn't want to go to school in the morning. And then the time came that I turned 17, 18, and I said, you know what? I'm a kid from the sea. I want to join the Navy. And everybody said, this is not for you, Renee. You're not going to make it. You don't have the right diplomas. You're not smart enough. And in fact, you're very dumb. And I applied anyway, and I got in. And I looked left and right from me, and I saw these people with these stars and stripes. And I said, wow, wouldn't it be great to become one of them? And everybody says, Renee, you got lucky. You got in the Navy. Wouldn't you be like, calm down, mate. You're not going to make it. You have to study for that. And I said, you know what? Watch me. I'll show you. And I applied, and I got in anyway. And I saw people jumping out of airplanes. I became a sergeant and the first sergeant, and applied for first sergeant major. And I saw people jumping out of airplanes. And I said, wow, wouldn't that be great? And a year later, I was jumping out of an airplane. And I saw and I saw a pilot. I said, wow, wouldn't that become great to become a pilot? And everybody, Renee, get serious. This is real stuff. This is not for you. And we all have people around us that pull us down like crazy. It's not for you. You're not going to make it. And in fact, you know what? Watch me. I'll show you. And exactly a year later, I was flying my own Macquarie in Belgium Armed Forces in Belgium, that is. And I said, but yeah, but you got lucky. And I said, yeah, I got lucky. I don't even answer these things anymore. I mean, if that's your statement, if that's your belief, believe it. I'm not going to argue. The only thing I remember is that survival mode of proving myself to the world hit all the time. And when I got back to Belgium, and then 3-4 years later got through a divorce, ending up with my 3 daughters, that was again survival mode. And it was only in 1995, after a year after my divorce, that I said, I have to stop proving myself to the world. If there's only one person I have to prove myself to, is myself. And that came through a book, my very first book in terms of personal development that I bought. And I started reading it. I said, wow, this is an amazing book, right? And that was an amazing change in my thinking of, you don't have to prove anything.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, also a motivation to, hey, this is my own flesh and blood, my 3 daughters. Come on, man, just do it. But still, the survival mode was still on, for sure.
And that takes a toll on the body, doesn't it? When you are constantly, and Mike, you must have had this certainly before you left your marriage. Almost that just survival, that constant living on adrenaline, the stress. Stress is one of the most damaging things we can engage with for our body. I really believe it's almost as bad as drugs. I just think it's such a killer, literally, stress.
I had to learn that lesson too. Corporate sales is a very stressful environment, and I think it got increasingly more so the more the targets became unachievable. Because they were all written by accountants, and but I can relate to a lot of what Rennie was saying there about, for want of a better term, being the strong male, the strong man, the different circumstances, not in an environment that he was in, but that was pretty much my upbringing as well, from a different sort of standpoint. I was thinking recently about some of my early school experiences, and boys were toughened up by by their games master or their PE teacher. We had an ex-army officer who was used to throw the medicine ball at us, and knocked a few children unconscious. Now, can you imagine where that would have been on the newspapers? Wow. It would have been front headlines,
Yeah.
So I think boys were, and this is going back to the 70s in my case, were taught to be strong and toughen up and don't cry and all that sort of stuff. And it's the programming we're giving until there's a crisis point, and the trigger could be marriage breakdown, it could be something else, it could be grievance, it could be the loss of some major family member or something. But you're absolutely right, Renee. I mean, I had a similar experience, and have done throughout life, of saying, you know what, I don't need to be the strong man here. I can just have a bit of a cry, or deal with it, process. Take time to process and not block it out, whatever it is that's challenging me,
It's almost like registering it, isn't it? Allowing it to exist first.
And also have an outlet for it. So I had what I called a lifeboat. I realized that I needed a lifeboat for myself, and I could choose who was in that lifeboat with me. And it was my brother and my sister, and it was one close friend. And you know, men struggle, especially after divorce separation, because women usually have women that rally around women. You know, there's 12 or 13 that, you know, come round, and there's a Prosecco ambulance or something. Men don't have. Men typically have two people on one. You know, they have two close male friends, maybe one or two, that they can phone up and say, do you know what, I'm struggling here, and yeah, let's go out for a beer and have a chat about it. And also, when you're in a major breakup, I often feel, and we might be able to relate to this ourselves, is that, you know, when you lose a close family member, somebody dies, everybody rallies around the person who's lost that person. And my experience was that my phone never rung, you know, and that's when I realized, well, I needed to outstretch my own hand and create my own lifeboat. And I could choose. What a wonderful thing. Who was going to be in there with me, you know, to help me through this process. And it was one of my building blocks. I think I actually wrote them down, 4 or 5 personal building blocks, one of which was to cycle more. And as you know, I'm still doing that. So there you go.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's such a good thing to do. Just finding that one thing. For author Steve McDermott, it was the ironing. So
yes,
that was the thing that broke him out of his cycle of depression, because his wife very, very sincerely and with love suggested, look, just do one thing that you achieve every day. What simple thing do you think you can manage? And he stole the ironing. And they laughed together, and she laughed with him. And he said, oh, I think I can do that. So he just did a bit of ironing every single day, like a couple of minutes. And soon he got to feeling like he'd achieved something. It just broke that cycle, and obviously not quite as good for you as cycling out in the fresh air. But the principle's the same, isn't it? To break that cycle, literally, of kind of. But let's bring it back to the now, because obviously I'd love to know, Mike. You know, I feel personally that life happens for us, and we can come out of everything that's happened to us and see life in a different way. But what does your daughter, if you don't mind sharing, how does she feel about what's happened with you, and what's your relationship? Are you happy to share that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have a fantastic relationship with my daughter. She's 24 now. We spoke last night. She lives up in Edinburgh. She went to Stirling University. She graduated in 2018 in the summer, and her mother and father were there together with her to share that wonderful milestone. And she's in work, as you know, especially now. A lot of young people are struggling, and she has a serious boyfriend, and they're looking to buy a place together and, you know, settle down and get on with it. So, you know, all of that's good, but she struggled in the early days, and she'll tell you that. But, you know, her life experience is very much more shorter, if you will, in the period that we're talking about. So, you know, she was very strong. She kicked through it herself very strong, so around about the A-level time. So she was kind of 12, almost 13 when this happened. A very difficult time for a young girl just coming into a teenager. And, you know, she had close friends as well. My strategy was to maintain as much continuity for her as I possibly could. So down to even, you know, the same bedroom for a while if she wanted it, the same house. And again, I was lucky I had building blocks to make that happen, and not everybody does. The same school environment, you know, and then she could choose, and she did well at school, got to university, got a degree, has become an independent, happy happy, as far as I know, together person. I haven't seen her for almost a year because she's been up there and I've been down in London, and so that's been a bit challenging. But I'm happy for her. She's up and running, and I think that's all we can want for our children. All too often we can fall into the trap of not letting them fledge their wings for a whole variety of different reasons, and long may it continue. It's just so. If she was here, she would tell you, herself. Hopefully, and I got married again, as I think I told you.
Congratulations.
In 2018, to my lovely wife Claire, and to answer your question again, Jesse, my daughter, she was my best man.
Oh, that's amazing. Love that.
Wow.
That must have been very special.
Setting a new trend, we were.
And why not? Why not, indeed? And how about you, Renee? I know you've got 3 daughters, and how old are they now?
My oldest is 32. She's a nurse in the front line of Corona in Belgium, and they're all in Belgium. I'm Belgium originally. And she's 32, a nurse in hospital, doing very well, has 3 kids. So I'm granddad 3 times already.
Wow.
I hope I don't look like one. And the second one is 30, is a teacher, English and mathematics in Belgium as well, in high school. And then the third one is working on we call it a bio farm. The way we have, how you call these vegetables that are without chemicals? How you call them?
Organic?
Organic, yeah. An organic farm. She's working on an organic farm and runs an organic shop in organic food. 28, and then I still have a son who is 11. Lives with his mom in Belgium. He's doing pretty well. He had good numbers in school, and can't complain at all. All 3, the oldest one, who really do know what happened. I mean, from the very beginning, they are, the only thing they can say is that they're very grateful for what happened and how I handled it, because that brought them a certain discipline. Because I was a single dad, and I had to have that discipline, that system. I had to be an example. Even though late night I might have a drink, and that didn't happen every day, just once in a while in the blue moon. But I had to be there. I had to have that discipline. I had to show them the discipline. Each time something went wrong, I said, you put a cross on a paper. If you have 5 crosses this weekend, blah, blah, blah. And there was like a system installed when they're very young, 2, 4, and 6. When they got older, we changed that, obviously. But there was a discipline, and they said, we are so happy for the way you handled it. Were they happy what happened at all? I mean, they don't ask for that, they don't choose that. But the way we handled it as a team, my 3 daughters and me, still today they say we're grateful the way you did it, because today, if it wasn't for that, we would not be where we are today. And that is because of the discipline and the systems but I had to implement it, and I did it because of a bit of my army background. But I had to do it, otherwise it would never have been like it went. I mean, and that's, they're very grateful for that. But on the other hand, I said to them as well afterwards, go for it, make your life a masterpiece. If I can be of any help, my door is open. But just go fully forward. Don't look back. I mean, the story about if you look in your rearview mirror in your car for 99% of the time, within 10 seconds you got a car accident, right? A lot of people do that. They look in their rearview mirror all the time. That means they look backwards in life, but they never look forward. And that's why so many people got stuck in there in what happened and oh my dear, and in those days, but you can't change it anyway. And that's what I told my daughters as well. Look forward, look to the future, and don't look back. I mean, you can look back for a bit, but don't look back all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Because otherwise you're not being present, are you, as well? So you're not only holding back the future, you're actually not enjoying what's right in there with you right at that very moment in time. So, that's really lovely to hear. It's just been a joy speaking to both of you tonight. Having these different perspectives of being a man, being a dad, and obviously being a dad of daughters. I mean, crikey, I remember why my dad went through with me and my sister because my parents split when I was very young. So absolutely, I think it's fantastic, and I love the fact that you're both sharing about this, because I'm sure hopefully there are some men watching this are in a similar boat, and trying to deal with the challenges and the bigger picture. I hope you both write your own books one day, because such valuable, beautiful stories that have got you where you are now, which is what it's all about, isn't it, really? Amazing, amazing. Well, thank you for watching and listening. A very big thank you to Mike Sheridan from London. Thank you, Mike, author, for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you.
Brilliant to have you. Mike's chapter is in this book. It's called His Menopause, and it is all about his overcoming anxiety, sadly about the trigger of that, which was his wife's terrible menopause, and his journey overcoming that, and a lot about cycling. And thank you very much to Renee for coming to us from Portsmouth. And
nice to meet you, Renee.
Nice to meet you, Mike, and thank you, Joe, for having me on the call.
Oh, pleasure. You can find Renee at his website, because Renee is a coach. I meant to say this at the beginning, but is a coach and an expert in body language. So if you want any help with that whole perspective that Renee teaches on that. Mike at the moment is cycling and looking to what happens next for him, which sounds like a fantastic idea once the weather gets a bit better anyway.
Yeah, I'm hoping not to get stuck in a rut there, but maybe you can help me with that, Joe, as well,
Well, maybe. I mean, I'll start with a bit more writing. Sure. Definitely can help you there, Mike. Definitely. So go and buy the book. The book is available on Amazon. It's available in paperback and in Kindle, and obviously join our weekly session, 7:00 Facebook Live here. Tomorrow is our book launch. So if you're watching this tonight, Wednesday night, tomorrow at 10 a.m. is our book launch. Go to Eventbrite, Being Fine Book, and you can join us in Australia, kind of, if you know what I mean. That's me, Jo Baldwin Trott. Good night, and see you again soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.